Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 262, I chat with Robert Zohn, Mark Henninger, and Joe Whipp about the Value Electronics Flat-Panel Shootout 2015. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded July 2nd, 2015. Episode 262, Value Electronics Flat-Panel Shootout 2015. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of AVSforum.com. This week, I was planning to do a chat room Q&A, but since the Value Electronics Flat-Panel Shootout just happened last week, I thought it really was more important for the moment to talk about that. We'll delay the chat room Q&A. Don't worry, we're going to do it later this month. But right now, we got some hot, late-breaking news, and that is the Value Electronics Flat-Panel Shootout, which happened last week at the CE Week trade show. And I've got three guests here today, guest geeks, I should say, to talk about it. First up is Robert Zohn, president of Value Electronics and founder and host, essentially, of the Flat Panel Shootout. Hey, Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, glad to have you here, too. Also with us is Mark Henninger, senior writer and my cohort in crime at avs.com, who's been here many times and will be again. Hey, Mark, welcome back.
Hey, Scott. Glad to be here.
You bet. Happy to have you. And a new guest geek this week, in fact, a member of AVS Forum who was at the Value Electronics Flat Panel Shootout, saw 2 of the 5 sessions that we did, and well, I'm really looking forward to hearing his opinions about everything that we had, too. His name is Joe Whipp. Hey, Joe, welcome.
Hey, Scott. Glad to be here. I've seen about 200 of these episodes, so it's an honor to be here.
Well, what do you know? Thank you so much. And you even classed up the joint and wore a tie, but as a trial lawyer, I think I understand.
and plus Catholic school.
Ah, well, that squares it right there, no question. Hey, those who are watching live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room there or at irc.twit.tv can post questions about the shootout as we go, and I will pass along as many as I can. So, Robert, why don't you start us off? Give us a little bit of background. When and how did you start the Flat Panel Shootout? What was your intention?
Thank you, Scott. We started publicly showing the shootout in 2004. And I was doing it for quite a few years before that because I always had a keen interest in determining the differences between the high-end televisions and how they compared against each other. So back in 2004, we made it a public event, and we invited the public. We webcasted it live. We took all the premium products that year and every year since then, put them butt up against each other on a wall and calibrated them and tested them with all the SMPTE and ITU test patterns to exploit all the good and bad out of them to figure out how they performed and how they competed against each other. So it's been a love of labor for over a decade now.
A love of labor, definitely, because there's a lot of labor involved. I know that now for sure. Yeah. And a labor of love, no doubt.
Yes.
The TVs that you choose are always the flagship models from, or have been traditionally, from each of the manufacturers, under the assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's going to represent the very best that each manufacturer can do, picture quality-wise.
That's correct, and it usually does represent that. There have been some years where we've found one step down actually performing better than a flagship model, so that has happened. And in some prior years, we used one step down model as well to put them in because they were so worthy and we had a lot of demand from the public. But typically, there's a vast difference between stepping down one model. Typically, you go to edge lit instead of rear edge instead of rear full array. So we stick with the flagship models primarily.
And this year we had 4 flagship models. We're going to talk about those in a minute. First, though, I want to turn to Joe and to Mark. Let's start with Joe. How long have you been attending the event, and what do you find its value to be to you?
Well, I think this was my 7th time to attend the event. I find them to be very helpful because it's the only place we can get all of the TVs together, calibrate it to a particular standard, and then you can make your determinations. You just can't do that going into a brick and mortar store where they're in vivid mode. One store has this brand, another store has that brand. You just can't compare them. So, you know, I think he's done a great job over the years of putting this together, and I think it's a valuable service to us in the out here in the geekdom land.
Yeah, I believe you. Mark, how about you? How long have you been going to the event?
So this is number 3 for me, and yeah, you know, my 3rd time voting, but you know, 2nd time voting as an expert, and it's been an interesting evolution because. Each time that I go, I actually have gained more knowledge about video. You know, each time I walk through the door, basically, I've been a more knowledgeable, you know, about the topic. So
that is
cool.
Certainly, Robert. I think that's one of the aspects of this event that you want to make sure happens, which is educating consumers, enthusiast consumers, to be sure. About what goes into making video, what the system standards are, why they were all calibrated in the way that they were. It's really an educational experience for the participants, as well as an opportunity, as Joe said, to see them all side by side in a well-controlled environment, all calibrated.
That's correct. We enjoy that part of it. A very, very big part of our event is to bring more awareness to quality video and to educate people on video performances and standards. So we've had some fantastic VIP guests throughout the years, and we've done a great job in spreading the word. We put the videos up on YouTube, and they're over 500,000 unique views right now. So it's a very popular event.
Somebody in the chat room asked if a video of this event was going to be put up, and I assume it has already. Is that correct?
Well, Mark put one up, and I love the one that he put up, and I linked to it, by the way. And
good.
we will take the event, we'll edit it down to one video that will be up in the next few weeks. Okay.
Dargo in the chat room was asking that question. And he thanks you for sharing that with us, and I do too, because certainly having that on a video that people can see after the fact is a great thing. However, I will also say that on the thread of about the shootout results that I posted on AVS, which is an extremely active thread, a number of people have commented, and rightly so, that you shouldn't expect to be able to evaluate the quality of each TV from the video, because you're looking at it through a video camera, which is a pretty significant filter compared to being able to see them, you know, right there in person. Joe, I assume you would agree with that.
100%. The videos just don't even give you a glimpse of what you see when you're there. So I can't imagine anybody making a decision based upon looking at these videos.
Or really, you know, I don't recommend people make a final decision based on anything but their own eyes. But the problem, of course, is that when, as you said, I think Joe made this point, when you go into a Best Buy or another brick and mortar store, you're looking at these TVs in their vivid mode, and they're just not calibrated properly. Plus, when you get them home, what your living room or home theater or whatever is not the same as a showroom floor by any means. So this is a rare opportunity to see these TVs right next to each other in a controlled environment, light-controlled environment, with all calibrated fully, as much as can be done. Each one allows anyway, and see them side by side that way, all playing the same content. I mean, Robert, you had a sophisticated matrix switcher there and 4 Oppo Blu-ray players that we were able to switch around, and that was able to send the same signal to all 4 TVs, which is, I think, a pretty important part of things.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we put a lot of effort into the switch and getting the latest firmware and specs on that switch so we can pass the color space properly. We test the switch very carefully. We certainly have to pass UHD at 60 frames per second. So we have a video server in there from Sony, actually, the FMPX10. So we pass 4K as well through there. It has 8 inputs and 16 outputs. It's quite a sophisticated switch.
Well, if we get more TVs next year, we'll certainly be able to accommodate them.
Right.
I'd like to make one, if I may, one.
Please.
Relating to the videos. I didn't mean to implicate that they're not important, because there's some very interesting over the years. I mean, you've had Joe Kane, Dr. Weber, various presenters that you otherwise wouldn't be able to hear or see talk about this stuff without the videos. So they do play an important role, but you just can't judge the quality of the TVs based on those videos.
That's a great point. That's a great point, that the videos also have, other things in them. This year we didn't have as many presentations because the event changed in a pretty radical way. Robert, tell us about, up till now, it's always been held in your store in Scarsdale, New York, right?
That's correct, yes. We've always held it in our store, and we thought that when we presented this idea to CE Week, we thought we'd have the opportunity to broaden the audience to more of a general audience, as well as to the media, a larger media presence as well, outside of just consumer electronics. We also thought that we would get new participants involved that would attend, and we would just spread the good word of quality video to more of a mainstream audience. And that was the intent. We also had a larger location where we can line the TVs up on the same plane exactly. So it gave us a larger venue. It was, I thought, an excellent idea for us to do it, and we plan to do it next year as well.
Yeah, in fact, there's a photo for those of you who are watching the video of the layout of the shootout, and I was honored to basically give the presentations on the second day of the 2 days. It was run on Wednesday and Thursday. Three sessions on Wednesday, 2 on Thursday, and I was busy on Wednesday. Mark Henninger and I were both busy on Wednesday shooting video for last week's podcast, and so I was able to do this on Thursday, and that was a lot of fun. And the other thing, though, that was very different about this, and why we didn't have a lot of presentations as in years past, is that we were in this room, great big room, nice room, fully light controlled, but we had to, because of unavoidable circumstances, we had to share the room with 2 other demonstrations in kind of an alternating fashion, which gave us only an hour and a half per session to evaluate these TVs. And so we didn't have time for a lot of extra presentations and so on. I'm hoping next year, one of the things that I hope to be able to do next year is work it out in such a way that each session is longer, which gives more time to evaluate the TVs and perhaps time to include presentations from people like Joe Kane and Dr. Larry Weber and so on. But it was what it was, and I think in general it worked very well. I wanted to also mention the ballot, because that got changed a bit from years past. We decided, and Robert, I'd love for you to talk about this, how we decided to jigger the ballot categories a bit in order to more obviously relate them to subjective experience rather than objective measurements, which took place during calibration.
That's right. Thank you. And by the way, the events every year have always run 5.5 to 6 hours. So cutting it and condensing it down to an hour and a half was very difficult. So typically we had 5 attributes. This year we extended it to 7 attributes, and we defined them differently. So instead of, we wanted it to be the impression that everybody had, subjective impressions. Rather, we took the scientific measurements. We know what they are. We didn't need help in determining contrast ratio mathematics. We know that.
Right.
But we wanted to get perceived contrast. How does it look to the human eye from a large pool of people? So we changed the heading. And by the way, Scott, you were the most instrumental in this, and I have to agree, it was brilliant. It made the event much better. And in fact, we're going to follow this guideline in the future. It's a much more presentable and accurate way for people to evaluate these TVs. So we did black quality instead of black level. We did perceived contrast instead of contrast level. We did color accuracy. We called it color fidelity in the past. And we did off-axis performance, which is something that we always evaluated, but we never had a voting category for it. We lumped it into the final category, which is overall picture quality. And we broke that out even a much smarter way. This year, we also added the category of screen uniformity and motion clarity instead of motion resolution. We measured motion resolution, but we want to have the viewer's opinion of motion clarity. And then we did the day mode as well. We also added a question, thanks to your brilliance again, of which was your favorite TV? And then we also said, why is this your favorite TV? Give us your reasoning why. Also very, very brilliant and very well thought out. So I want to thank you for those contributions as well as all your others, because it really made the value of the evaluation much greater to have this question.
Thank you. Like that. Thank you so much for your kind words. I was so happy to be involved. I was particularly interested in which TV is your favorite, because the voting categories, when they were all tabulated, and your daughters, Leanne and Katie, I must thank them for doing the number crunching there. They entered all that data into a big spreadsheet, but they were unweighted. Each category got the same weight as every other one when tabulating the results. However, each person has their own set of weights. One person might think that black level is most important. Another person might think color accuracy is most important. Another might think motion clarity is most important. And so that question about which TV do you think is best really allows people to take those weights into account for themselves. Now, we didn't tabulate those results or include them in the final scoring, but we did tabulate them. We counted them, and we're going to reveal that in a little while. Joe, I'm particularly interested to ask you in this particular question because you didn't put any TV in as which is the best, and I want to have you talk about that a little bit.
Well, the reason I did that was because probably maybe I misunderstood, but I really wouldn't have bought any of those TVs that we saw.
Why not?
Well, I guess I can take them one by one.
Sure.
First, the Panasonic, which I thought was the poorest of the four in terms of its overall performance. The black levels were just, at least as that was calibrated at the event, were so mediocre and downright poor that I just can't. There's just no way I'd buy a TV like that.
Well, now we're gonna talk about that more because Mark has some things to say about that as well. And before you continue, and I want you to continue, let me just quickly list the contenders. We had the Panasonic TC65 CX850, which basically has a unilateral price program price of $3,500, by far the least expensive TV there. We had the LG 65 EG 9600 OLED TV, the only OLED in the shootout, which lists for $9,000. That's a 65-incher, as is the Panasonic. The Samsung UN78JS 9500 is a 78-inch, and that lists for $10,000. Actually, the UPP is $10,000. And the Sony XBR 75 X940C, all three of those, other than the LG, are LCD TVs, full array with local dimming. That lists for $8,000. So the Panasonic is quite a bit less expensive, and yet, as you say, as calibrated, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, it did have the weakest black performance.
Oh, there's no question about it. Although it had spot-on color.
Yep.
Well,
The color was
Also-
excellent. But
And
Sorry.
also numerically in the calibration, it actually had the best blacks, just mysteriously,
I
we
know.
should say.
I know.
Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? That and there again shows something different between calibrated results and actual experience.
well, if you look at the graphs that Scott posted, I think yesterday online, the post calibration results on color were almost identical with the LG, the Sony, and the Samsung, but they all three had very different color when you looked at them. At least
Yeah.
I did anyway. So I found that to be very interesting. I'm not sure why that's the case, but
Well, another reason not to only go by calibration.
yes,
I
agree.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. It's a strange phenomenon that I don't think I can really explain either. Maybe somebody in the chat room might be able to help us out here.
I just wanted to make one quick comment on that, if
Sure.
I may. You know, it's very interesting, but when you look at something that's very slightly off, maybe a little bit warm, next to something that's just a little bit cold, a little blue next to a little yellow, and they're both very slightly off, but they're butt up against each other, it
Yep.
makes the cold one look much colder, makes the warm one look much warmer. When you
Yep.
separate them, you don't see that.
That's
so-
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so seeing them in isolation, you wouldn't notice that, but seeing them right next to each other, you would. Very good point. Very good point. Okay, Joe, you were telling us about why you didn't vote for any of them.
Okay. So, I mean, Robert makes a great point, and that is why this shootout's so valuable, because otherwise you wouldn't see these differences. If you go to Best Buy or somewhere, you won't see them. The Samsung, you know, people on AVS forum know my opinion on this, but that curve is so bad that there's no way I would put one of them in my house. That's just not going to happen. I mean, I wouldn't take it if they gave it to me.
Wow.
The LG
Also curved.
also, yeah, but it's not quite as bad. But I would obviously prefer a flat one. Had those, I mean, it was like almost like flapping wings on the sides during that Life of Pi sequence. There's just no way. I mean, who knows if that's going to pop up on anything you watch.
Yeah. There's been an awful lot of discussion of this on AVS about how on the LG, I'm just going to describe it for people who haven't seen or read the post. On the sides of the LG OLED, there was this darkening on the side edges of the image, especially at low, what are called APL or average picture level, so dark scenes. You would see this, and it was very strange. And there are some people on AVS who are saying, oh, well, you know, once you've got several hundred hours on it or you've turned it on and off a bunch of times, that tends to go away. I don't know.
Well, maybe LG should age their displays before they ship them to you.
Well, that's an idea, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to add, whenever I can, a comment about that as well.
Sure.
May I do it now?
Sure.
Sure.
I want to tell you that I've spent a lot of time with that panel, and I'm so embarrassed to say I never saw that until the shootout. So I wondered why. And to reproduce that, you have to find scenes that not only have low APL, but they have almost the same APL, no contrast. If there's bright lights anywhere in the scene, or if the APL changes, or if some of it is 10 IRE and some of it's 30 IRE, you don't see that. You only see it when it's 20 IRE across the screen.
I have to say I disagree. Because, for example, we put up the SMPTE color bars, which is, in fact, the pattern that you see in that one photo. There it is, the SMPTE color bars. And you'll notice in the lower left corner and the lower right corner, as it turns out, there is a gray sort of square. And when I put that up for the color accuracy part of the voting, you could clearly see that banding in that lower left and lower right squares. And somebody in the audience pointed it out my first session that I did. They said, "What's going on there?" Now, I want to make sure everybody understands that neither Rob Sabin, editor of Sound and Vision magazine, who did the presentations on Wednesday, nor I said anything about any of this during the presentation. We simply said, here's what we're going to vote on. here's the content. Take a look at it. Tell us what you think. Write down your vote, so on and so forth. And somebody raised their hand and said, "What's going on there?" And I had to say, well, that's something that we've noticed on this particular TV, and it's not the only one. Robert, I think you and David McKenzie, the calibrator, took a look at 2 different samples of that TV and saw the same thing, right?
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, so it wasn't a sample problem.
And I
I've
also
seen it before.
I saw it on the SMPTE color bars as well. It was very minor and it was in the corners, but I did also see that.
It was there. It was there. So Tim Alessi from LG was there at the event, and he responded to the question and said, "We know that it's there. We know that it's a problem." And David spent a lot of time trying to figure out if there were any settings that he could set to get rid of it, and there weren't. Mark, you had something to say about this.
Oh, only that online on the forum, I mean AVS forum, I've seen examples of that, and I've also seen other OLEDs behave that way in the past.
That way.
Yeah, so definitely not isolated to 1 or 2 samples either, or like a same batch type situation. And there definitely are theories out there, and right now the status of the people on AVS who have talked about it is that they're either waiting for a new panel or a new board. So it looks like LG is going to try to fix it even in existing units.
And I have to say, this is another comment I've seen a lot of about why the shootout is important, is that it can, in some cases, reveal things that cause the manufacturers to go back and try and fix them, which if there were no shootout, there might be some people complaining about this or that, but it wouldn't be a large enough impetus to the manufacturers to do anything about. So I have to give kudos to Robert for that as well.
Thank you. I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of, is that we've made a lot of change with the manufacturers. They've fixed a lot of things. They've enhanced a lot of things. And we've been thankfully very, very instrumental in that. And that is a mission of mine, other than the education one that you brought out earlier.
Right. Now, some people have asked, okay, we had the flagship from LG, Panasonic, Samsung, and Sony. What about Sharp? What about Vizio? Why weren't they in there? Robert, what's the answer to that question?
Well, we want them to be in there, and we look at all the products every year. In both of those cases, products weren't available yet. And you may note that typically our event is in the late summer, early fall, because we wait for all the late arrivals. This year, because we did it with CE Week in partnership, we were not able to adjust that date. CE Week is when it is. So unfortunately, we were not, those products were not available. The UX, UX30. Yeah, and Vizio's reference series were not available. We would have loved to include them. And as they become available, we put them up on the shootout wall right behind me here, and we evaluate them. So it's a living event.
Very good. And we should also point out that all the TVs in the shootout must be production samples. That is, samples that could have easily been bought at any store. In fact, the Samsung, Sony, and LG were actually taken out of your own retail inventory. So somebody could have bought them. They were randomly picked, right?
That's correct, and I hope somebody does buy them.
I'm sure you do. The only exception this year was the Panasonic. It was a production sample. No question about that. I would not have, I too, like you, Robert, would not have wanted anything but full production samples. But the Panasonic only arrived in the U.S. as a production sample a few days before the shootout. So, and it got delivered to the shootout on Monday, and the shootout started on Wednesday. So that was kind of a nail biter, but it was a production sample, and it was only very lately arrived in the U.S. So that was kind of a little slide there, but it was a production sample, so I have to give it that. Robert, also I want to make sure everybody understands that even among the TVs that you don't carry, the brands that you don't carry, you would if you had to go out and buy one somewhere else to include it in the shootout, right?
Thank you, and we've done that in prior years as well. One year we had a ZT60 that had an exclusive with Best Buy, and we showed it because it was important to show there. And in fact, you arranged for the Panasonic, and Panasonic's business model is online only, and they were kind enough to actually extend us a franchise directly. So we're now factory direct dealers there. But at the time, that was announced to me moments before we went live with the event. So we show and include all products that are worthy. The shootout is treated separately from my retail business.
UJ is asking, did Joe comment on the Sony? I don't think so. So, Joe, give us your comments on the Sony.
I thought the Sony was the best TV that I saw. Although I was not as happy with the color accuracy of the set, which I found to be way too warm. We could see that in flesh tones, like Life of Pi. The skin tones were too brown, and it showed up in there was I forget what disc was being played. It was a test disc of some variety, and the black, it had a gray background with 4 or 5 squares in it. And on that set, all the other TVs had a gray color, and on the Sony it was green. And so for an $8,000 TV, I would want a little more. I would like better color. But I love the fact that it was flat. The black levels were very, very good. But I didn't like the speakers on the sides either. But I'd like to see that TV without those speakers. But I thought that was the best overall, balancing black levels, color accuracy, the fact it was flat. For me, that was probably the best TV.
So if you had answered that question, which TV do you think is the best? And I should have probably added among these here, you would have picked the Sony.
Yes.
All right. Mark, how about you? What general comments about the different TVs and which one you picked as do you think is the best and so on?
My brain is trying to think about where to start. So how about this? Why would the TVs look different but have such precise, vanishingly small delta E numbers? The only answer I can think of is because you're using a profiled colorimeter to do the actual calibrations instead of a spectrophotometer, and that there are tiny little variations in those profiles that create a variation in how it, in the end, reads those exact numbers. And so you actually do get a variation in that final supposedly reading perfect calibration. You'd have to go back with a spectrophotometer and actually check to see if that's what's actually going on. So that's a very good point. The Klein K10, which was the instrument that David McKenzie used, is a colorimeter which needs to be profiled properly for different display types. And I assumed he did that. I'll have to ask him when I talk to him next, but that may very well be, it's an excellent point. That may be something that we can improve next year. At the end of this show, we're going to talk about what we might do next year, but that's certainly one of them, is to use a spectrophotometer rather than a colorimeter. At least to verify that they actually are all, identical at the end of the day with some kind of a short sweep. Okay, so at the actual show, I voted by impressions, and I ended up giving the Samsung and a Sony a numerical tie in the voting categories, and wrote down that I liked the Sony the most. But and I scored the Panasonic significantly below them because it really had to take a ding on the black levels, and ultimately I decided to investigate that because on paper, it didn't seem like the Panasonic should do as bad as it did. And I want to make a comment going back to what we were talking about before. Robert mentioned the side-by-side effect of the TVs. We know that the Sony was oversaturating a tiny bit. And so the TVs next to it are almost by definition going to look a little bit undersaturated as a consequence. So that could have been a potential ding against it, especially since there was no other TV next to the Panasonic. It was over on the left, whereas the Samsung on the right then had the OLED to its right. you know, so I'm just saying there are perceptual tricks that your brain plays, like Robert said, when the TVs are next to each other that maybe exaggerate effects. So
that's a good point. Very good point.
You know, so in the end, I would have voted the OLED the absolute winner if it had not had the uniformity defect that it did, and it actually numerically came very close to winning anyway, just a couple points in my voting.
It did. Well, in your voting, yeah.
In my voting, I'm talking about my voting. So I gave a tie to the two flagship folds, the Samsung and the Sony, and just under it, I had the you know, in numerical score, the OLED, and then way under it, I had the Panasonic. But but I just wanted to say, you know, as far as my impressions go, there's something different. If you had different priorities, if you had different circumstances, I think the TVs would be viewed as being closer to each other than maybe the results or some of the things you read online would imply, because there's really a give and take with each TV. You know, I don't know if I should talk about it now or later, but, you know, I try to look into like why there was such a discrepancy between the measured result of the black levels of the Panasonic, you know, and then what everybody saw at the event. And,
I think this is a great time to talk about it. Let me preface that by saying that I talked with David McKenzie, the calibrator, about the Panasonic, and he said that part of the mandate of the shootout is to get each TV as close to the system standards that we know well as possible. And in terms of the Panasonic, there was an issue with the parameter called gamma, which is the way the TV responds to different brightness levels in the input signal. So if the input signal is saying play black, it plays black. If it says play white, it plays white. If it says to reproduce some measure of gray, then it does that following a particular type of curve, which currently is called gamma. Now, we wanted the TVs to all conform to a particular gamma, which is sometimes called BT 1886 and sometimes called 2.4. Don't worry about that. What the point is we wanted the TVs to conform to that gamma. Now, on the Panasonic, it was possible to get much deeper blacks, much deeper, by strengthening the local dimming control in the TV. But when you did that, you lost that gamma completely. And you might think, well, what the heck difference does it make? It's only this weird number gamma. Well, it makes a difference in what's called shadow detail. So if you're watching a dark scene, and we watched some stuff from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, to be exact. If we had set the Panasonic so that it produced much better blacks, all of the detail in the low-level scenes that we were looking at would have been completely lost. Completely lost. So David made the decision to click that control up one, away from down one from maximum, which brought the gamma right into line where it was supposed to be, allowed us to see that shadow detail, but it also raised the black level significantly. So that's the preamble to why the Panasonic looked as it did. It could have looked better in terms of black level, but it would have looked a lot worse in terms of shadow detail. So that's the genesis. Now, Mark, you took it upon yourself, and what fabulous initiative. I have to congratulate you tremendously for this. You actually went up to Panasonic in New Jersey, I think, and took a look at another CX850. And tell us about that.
Right. So I wanted to see if I could get similar measurements to what we saw in the calibration results. And I wanted to play with different settings, and I wanted to see what happened when I changed the local dimming, you know, to the various strengths. And it is true. When you go to the high strength local dimming, you do get, you know, the shadow detail is diminished. But, you know, I want to point out there that if you look at and even if you look at the video or a photo of the shootout, you'll see that there was a lot more shadow detail showing on the Panasonic, that shows through on the Panasonic than on the other TVs. I mean, and I noticed that when I was there. It was like it was a milky gray background, but you saw every single star. And then the two other FALD LCDs showed a lot of stars, and then I felt the OLED showed maybe the fewest stars, but
you're talking about like an outer space scene.
In outer space, for example, yeah. So the Panasonic was actually rendering the most shadow detail, and this is something you can even see in a rough, video still. The video clip, one of the video clips that I shot, you paused several times in gravity, and you can actually see that even in those little. I mean, I shot it in 4K, so you can see it because of that kind of. Anyway, so my point is that even if you do lose that shadow detail, that you were seeing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't. It's not like the amount of black crush that you have with the OLED, which never achieved a really like perfect gamma even after calibration. So, it's an open question what recipe would be the best. And another AVS member asked if, we turned on the like shadow recovery function or whatever. And that's getting away from like the calibrator's, notion of turning off, things that mess basically with the color. But other viewers might say, hey, if I'm just watching a space movie, I'll crank this stuff up. But I don't want to go down that road conversationally. What I really want to talk about is why perceptually you would think that it was that much brighter than the other TVs. And I have a pretty basic theory, and it is the letterbox bars. The other two TVs, simply put, use their full array local dimming to shut off those letterbox bars. And they also
we should say the LEDs behind
the LEDs behind them, right? So they're
making them pure black.
Yeah, pure black. I mean, there's a little bit of leakage, but and so there is like a little bit of floating black level thing, but they stay extremely dark. The Panasonic doesn't do that at all. The letterbox bars follow whatever the rest of the scene is doing, and it also never goes to like a truly black. It basically only goes to a pretty dark, gray at its darkest, and that includes the letterbox bars. So
now, was that your experience when you played with the second setup up in Panasonic's lab?
Yes,
and even set to the strongest FALD setting.
But the thing is, with the strongest FALD setting, it basically goes to near black. So yes, there could be some leakage, but it behaved much more like the other two TVs with it on the strong mode. Yes, it's only on medium or low, strength that it has these milky blacks. So it is a trade-off, and I don't know if you could find a way in the high setting to make it perform, or look like the other TVs. I mean, I would love to have a chance to play a lot with it, and it sounds to me like they only had 2 days, so maybe they didn't have the amount of time that you would necessarily have with another TV to experiment, with variations. And I don't know if they would try to experiment in that way anyway. That's sort of like, but these TVs with their HDR capability, they're not necessarily meant to be constrained, to the standards you use for darkroom viewing, BT 709. They might be in like mixed light environments for people who like, a brighter image, and they might not, they might use more, as it were, of the TV's contrast capabilities that's biased towards brightness, but they might use it in conjunction with that high strength mode that does, create the actually deep black. So don't know, just saying, maybe that capability is there. I know that the AX900, which I reviewed, behaved almost identically in terms of the full array local dimming algorithm and how it behaved in each of those strengths. So this is Panasonic's, this is their formula, and it's what you have to work with. And
that's what we had to work with. And we made a decision, based upon the mandate of the shootout, which is to get as close to those system standards as possible. Now, speaking of the system standards, Robert, I want to talk to you a bit about the fact that we decided to calibrate the sets with basically the same standards that are used for high definition. These are all ultra high definition TVs in that they have a pixel resolution of 3840 by 2160 pixel resolution. And so, but they also have the potential for high dynamic range and wide color gamut. And so many people have asked me, why did we calibrate them for basically the high definition standard of what's called BT 709 color, the BT 1886 gamma, and a peak light output of 35 foot Lamberts, which corresponds to the current standard dynamic range standard, more or less, for viewing in a dark room. We also did daytime viewing, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I'd love for you to talk about why we did what we did in terms of calibrating them and in fact displaying mostly content that was from Blu-ray, which was 1080p, not native UHD.
Thank you. Good question indeed. Well, not all the standards are set, particularly for high dynamic range. Those standards are not
in terms of
fully set.
UHD. Yes, correct.
For UHD, for high dynamic range. So without a standard, but more importantly, without proper content. So we just didn't have content available graded for P3 or Rec 2020, if that's what they pick, and I hope it's not, or HDR. So without content and without proper standards set, we calibrated to Rec 709 and to standard dynamic range of 35 foot Lamberts for nighttime. For daytime, we didn't cap, we didn't set that. We let the displays pretty much do whatever they could do in maximum peak luminance.
Right, maximum peak luminance without clipping. Without
clipping, that's right. And I don't think we picked maximum for the Sony because it was so bright.
Was that the Sony, or I guess it was the Sony?
Sony, 240 foot Lamberts. Yeah.
This is
sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, just it's a micro nitpick, but
yes.
The way I saw it is you have two categories that involve black levels, which are the perceived contrast and the perceived black levels or whatever, and then you have the day mode, which essentially is contrast as achieved by or it's basically highlights. It's highlight capability.
Well, it's brightness, it's light output, highlight capabilities in the presence of a lot of ambient light in the room.
Right. Whereas the perceived contrast was actually capped to the 35 foot Lambert is really what I'm trying to say. So so there isn't a perceived. So you only really have one category that weighs that extra brightness related contrast, and two categories that basically rate how you perceive contrast based on black levels. Is how I saw
everybody knows that we certainly didn't cap its ability to do minimum luminance level in day or night. We made them as black as they can be without crushing.
Without crushing and while maintaining gamma. As we talked about before, the Panasonic could go black or could go deeper in the blacks, but at the expense of shadow detail. So that was in a sense kind of a judgment call, although we were trying to follow the rules of the shootout. So, but it's something we can look at for next year, certainly. And Mark, your point is very good about how there really is only one day mode voting category, but there are two that are based upon that lower cap of the peak luminance. I like to say also that because we don't have a standard for HDR and wide color gamut, and there's almost no content available with wide color gamut anyway. There is a little bit with high dynamic range, but only on the Samsung, because only the Samsung has that capability right now. The other three will get it with a firmware update, but we don't know when. Sometime this year, presumably. But in any event, because of all those factors, I thought that playing Blu-ray content, which is mastered at 709, 1886 gamma, peak white of 30 foot Lamberts. We went to 35, but in any event, those things wouldn't be different if we played UHD content, which we did a little bit from the Sony server, Robert, as you mentioned. But because sorry,
not only is it not different, but really what you would expect as a TV with that enhanced capability should be able to ace the current standard. And that is definitely what we saw. This is definitely what we saw, because if you look at those LCD scores coming so close to OLED, last year they were so far back from OLED. So clearly something has changed in LCDs in terms of how people perceive them.
Mm-hmm. I am so grateful that a number of chat roomers are agreeing here. Let me just quickly point up the... Chumley asked, wait, don't those standards change per screen size and viewing distance? No, they do not. They are the same. The only thing that relates screen size, and seating distance is resolution, how close you sit to the screen. As the resolution goes up, you sit closer to the screen. But Rusty Bones says, due to lack of 4K material, I think calibrating them to HD was a great idea. Thank you, Rusty Bones. Undermined said the same thing. I agree to calibrate to 709. Most content people are going to realistically display on them will be at 709 for a few years to come. Exactly so. So, thank you, Dargo, for your kind words. So, Mark, you saw the CX. Just tell me your opinion. Would you have sacrificed shadow detail for deeper blacks on the Panasonic?
Definitely during those demos, which I guess would, the question is, should you actually be changing settings, you know, for a particular demo, like the contrast, the perceived contrast demo, to basically let it do its maximum and maybe go back? I don't know. Actually, I don't really have a good answer.
It's a tough one, isn't it? It's a tough question.
It definitely is. And that is because the TV next to it that Sony was doing, in my opinion, with its performance in terms of black levels, just about the best job I've seen from an LCD. I mean, it was really like, okay, you have to compete with this now.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something about, changing some settings for certain tests. We did that for 2 tests, and I want to make sure everybody knows that too. We did it for motion clarity, the motion clarity test, and we did it for the day mode, obviously, because we had to switch to a different mode in order to have the settings for the greater peak luminance. But we also did it for motion clarity, and the reason is we wanted to give each TV the best possible chance to perform well on the motion clarity test. So in the case of the Sony and Samsung, we were able to do that with what's called backlight flashing or backlight scanning, which turns the backlight on and off, which does improve motion clarity. But it also, in the case of the Sony, brought the luminance, the brightness of the set way down. Joe, what did you think of the motion clarity tests?
Well, I'm a plasma guy, and so I'm used to the motion on the plasmas that I have. I thought the Sony did. My big takeaway from this whole shootout was how far LCDs have come. That's
a huge takeaway. That's a huge one.
I mean, they've come so far from when I first started going to these shootouts. It's not even funny. I thought I thought the motion on the Sony was very good, but again, like it definitely dimmed the picture, and the fact that you had to change the settings to do that I thought was a little problematic. But I thought as it was done, I thought the motion on the Sony was very good.
Right. On the Panasonic, we had to use frame interpolation because they don't have a backlight scanning thing. So that was another thing. Well, it's a good question about whether or not to make such a change in order to present all the TVs in their best possible light. Robert, what do you think of that?
Ask me that question again quickly.
Oh, sure. When we went to the motion clarity test, we actually went into the TV's menu systems and set the backlight scanning to its maximum, or the frame interpolation in the case of the Panasonic, which doesn't have backlight scanning.
Right.
And some people did complain about that, of, hey, what are you doing? You're going in there and changing something. And we did it in order to make the TV, perform as well as it could on very difficult motion tests. But I wonder if it might have been better just to leave it the way it was.
Well, it would have performed much differently had we left it. And I think we were trying to show the best capability of the TVs in motion clarity. So it's a judgment call there as well. And if time permits, I'd like to make a closing little remark about emissive and transmissive.
Okay, well, I'll leave you some time for that. We don't have a lot of time left. Only got about 7 minutes,
well,
8 minutes or so.
I would like to chime in a little bit and on that issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if I'm sitting there, if I have this TV in my home, I'm not going to be up changing the settings for motion. I mean, I want to sit down and watch television.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you have to change the setting and change the actual performance of the TV to make the motion better or perform at its best, I'd like to have the motion perform at its best, the color at its best, black level at its best, right? Without having to go up and changing settings.
You only want everything all at once, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm used to. My sets are calibrated, and I don't touch them. Well, I don't change the settings when I'm watching content.
Mm-hmm. What plasmas do you have? Just out of curiosity.
I have 3. I have an old 42-inch ED commercial plasma from Panasonic that's in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a 50 pH PWD 7UI commercial Panasonic, which is in the family room behind me here. I've had that since Election Day 2004. I always remember that.
Did you buy it for the election results?
No, I was standing in line to vote, and in a long line, wondering, I hope I get home before they delay the television. So that's why. And then the main TV is a Pioneer Elite 141.
Ah, that's the 60-inch last generation Kuro.
That is correct.
Man, oh man, that is a fine TV, and it's so interesting how long has it been? 6-7 years since the Kuro was discontinued. Still is somewhat of a reference.
Yeah, and I've had Dwayne Davis, who you've had on the podcast, and who's worked on many of these shootouts, and he's done his magic to drop the black levels. And when I see an OLED black, I don't pine for OLED blacks watching my Kuro. It's still a great television, but I realize it's it's going to be a dinosaur with high dynamic range and 4K. I was able to see the Joe Kane presentation on high dynamic range, and I was blown away by it.
Yeah, we should mention that was one thing that CE Week offered us the opportunity to do was we had the shootout. And then in the same room, alternating with us and alternating with Mark Waldrop's high-resolution audio demo, Joe Kane gave a presentation of high dynamic range on a Samsung TV, because that's the only one that currently has that capability. And I agree. It was truly amazing. And I hope that everybody who attended the shootout stayed around for the Joe Kane demo, because that was really something.
Yeah, and real quickly, that wasn't just a high dynamic range event, but he also demonstrated P3 color there as well. So that
that's
made,
right.
to me, that made the difference even more compelling for the future of HDR and wide dynamic range, wide color gamut.
Absolutely.
Now, Undermined in the chat room is making a point about this selection of which TV do you think is best based upon your own personal preferences. He says, motion clarity to me is as important as accuracy, color accuracy, I assume you mean, especially for anyone that plays video games or watches sports. See, so it depends on how you're going to use the TV, which one you're going to choose to be the best. So I just think that is very telling right there. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. Joe, did you have any other comments that you wanted to make sure you got in here?
Well, the only comments were two, where the takeaways were the fact that LCDs have come a long way, and I was really impressed with what I saw in terms of the black levels. And LG's got some work to do, some bugs to iron out from those on the OLEDs. I'm an OLED. I think OLED's a very promising technology, but they definitely have to get the kinks out. Especially at these price points. Yeah.
It certainly commands a significant premium over LCD TVs. I just wanted to, before I go on, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that in the voting categories, after it was all tabulated, the LG won, both from, we separated out the enthusiast or non-professional votes, of which there were 72, and the professional votes, professional calibrators, TV reviewers. Mark Henninger was one of them. And there were 5 of those. And both groups put the, basically by the tabulated results, based on these 7 categories, came up with the exact same order. They were very, very close, the top three anyway. LG OLED won, even despite this this problem of the sides darkening. The Sony came in second, I believe. Is that correct? Let me double check that.
No.
Is that right?
No, definitely the Samsung came in second.
Oh, Samsung came in second. My mistake. Pardon me.
For sure.
Samsung came in second. Sony came in third, but again, they were very, very close. Now, to answer to the question, which TV do you think is best and why? That was more of a runaway for the LG, which I was quite surprised. 33 out of 72 of the non-professionals chose the LG despite the screen uniformity issue. Very strange. 16 chose the Sony, 15 chose the Samsung. So that was kind of a dead heat. One person chose the Panasonic, which spoke to the importance of color accuracy as far as that's concerned. So that was an interesting result as well. Hey, don't you think, Robert?
Yes, and it actually goes to the final points I wanted to bring out.
Okay.
You know, from early childhood, at least guys like my age anyway, we watched CRT television, emissive display technology. Then we graduated to plasma, another emissive display technology. I don't know if it's a difference technically or if it's just that our eyes are used to watching and enjoying individual pixel control, which gives us no blooming, better off access viewing because we don't have polarizing filters and all the things that LCD requires structurally to make them work. But we're definitely trained to enjoy and look at the individual pixel of an emissive display with individual light control for each pixel level. And I think that that goes into some of the impressions and some of the favoritism that we have towards emissive displays. We're trained to look at emissive displays. Also, if I'm not mistaken, and I'd have to put my glasses back on, but I think the professional's choice was Sony for number 2 and Samsung number 3. And if you look at both professional and the general attendees, it looks almost like a dead heat. They were so close. You can declare a winner by very small fractions, but they're really more close than they are different. And I wanted to apologize for not mentioning Rob Sabin's input to the categories, because you and I and Rob sat together to come up with those categories. We also opened the ballot box together at the end. And that was a lot. That ceremony was a lot of fun as well.
Yes, I don't want to miss out on mentioning Rob Sabin, editor of Sound and Vision magazine and soundandvision.com, who presented on the first day and who contributed to the editing, since he and I are both editors of the ballot and the process and so on. He made some great comments and contributions as well, and I thank him for that. I'm looking at the ballot results, and in fact, the professionals did rank the Samsung second as well, and the Sony third, but it was very close. But interestingly, among the which TV was your favorite, I mentioned that the non-professionals, 33 picked the LG, 16, I forget what it was, 16 the Sony and 15 the Samsung, or the other way around. But among the professionals, the 5 professionals, 2 picked the Sony, 2 picked the Samsung, and 1 picked the LG. So that was a different result than the non-experts, which I found pretty interesting as well. Mark, any final words?
Oh, just that I'm looking forward to next year, because I think that LCDs are going to be performing at this unprecedented level, and the OLEDs are going to be fixed, and we're going to have the new footage, the new UHD, HDR, extended color gamut, amazing video that, I mean, come on, it's going to be such a huge leap. It's going to be like next year's shootout is going to be the most exciting shootout ever.
I tend to agree. I was over at Joe Kane's yesterday, as it happens, looking at some high dynamic range content on a Samsung, since it's the only one that can do it. And wow, it just looked so fantastic, with wide color gamut as well, P3 color gamut as well. And it just looked amazing. So I'm 100% in agreement with you. I can't wait for next year's shootout, which is going to be very, very exciting. So I want to thank you guys all for being here. It's been a great hour that has just zipped right by, as it usually does. Thank you first to Joe Whipp, an AVS member, for spending the time with us today. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Good. Glad to hear it. And Mark Henninger, a senior writer at AVS Forum, thank you as always for being here.
Tons of fun, and I'll be online in that big thread with all that discussion going down.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of discussion, and for those of you who want to participate, become members of AVS Forum, totally free, and join on in there. It's a great conversation. There's over 1 million great conversations on AVS Forum. And finally, Robert Zohn, president of Value Electronics, thank you so much for all your great work in the industry and for putting this on for the last 11 years. And here's looking at 2016.
Thanks very much, Scott. I was very honored to work with you this year, and I thank you for all you've done for us. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Of course, you can find out more about the shootout at valueelectronics.com, where you can buy any of these TVs as well. Also, you can read tons about it on avsforum.com, which is where you can find me and Mark online, and Joe, for that matter. You can always email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott, also at AVS Forum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/HTG and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit-home-theater-geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Andrew Jones, fabulous speaker designer who has moved from Pioneer over to ELAC and has a new set of speakers that you're going to want to hear about. And I'm sure he will be very happy to talk about them, and I'm looking forward to that tremendously. So I do hope you will join me. Until then, geek out.